And as we do, if you have a Bible, go ahead and open that up to Matthew chapter 5. If you don't have a Bible, but you have a smartphone, then yes, you do have a Bible. And you can open that up to either BibleGateway.com, Bible.org. There's a couple great and easy Bible websites that are right there. If you're a paper Bible person and you don't have that with you, but you'd prefer, over in the back, we've got some Bibles that you can go ahead and grab back there and use. I just think it's helpful. We'll be right here in Matthew, starting at verse 27, talking about everybody's favorite thing to talk about, which is this concept of lust. Actually, which is where we're at in the Sermon on the Mount. We started a couple weeks ago. We started this series within a series. We've been going through the Gospel of Matthew. And then as we started this Sermon on the Mount, we realized that Jesus is pulling his disciples together, his true close followers, and he's sharing with them some intimate teaching. And it really fits this theme, show them a better way. All right, this isn't Jesus preaching to the crowds, trying to impose or impart on them some moral standard. This is actually Jesus pulling his closest followers together and saying, hey, I've got something so good. I've got something that's so much better. I've got something that is world-changing, life-changing, and I need you guys in on this with me. You guys want to do this? Do you guys want to follow me in this? And I don't know if you can hear or see the difference in that it's not this set of rules and regulations that are slapped and imposed on. This is actually an invitation to come and see. And for those that do come and see, Jesus promises that this is a better way. And Jesus actually promises that this will change the world. And I don't know about you, but especially when it comes to this concept of lust, when it comes to everything that surrounds, sexuality and stuff like that, man, I think we could use a better way, because I don't know about you, but I'm sick of seeing stuff like this. I'm sick of seeing the scandals. I'm sick of seeing great people fall. I'm sick of seeing the people that we love, the people that we trust, the people that we look up to fall down from their pedestals and have all of that come crashing down. I've seen too many pastors. I've read too many books. I've had too many friends. And it's not just the celebrities. It's not just that, because we've almost become numb to that, right? I don't know about you, but we've even got a story like that right now in our politics with our president, and I really don't see too much surrounding it. It's kind of like, well, okay, yep, that kind of happens. I don't see too much controversy. I don't see too much surrounding it, because we've come to expect that people fall into this. And yet for Jesus and for Jesus' followers, he wants to show us a better way around this. And it goes way back. It goes way back even to Leviticus. And I love this verse here. You shall be holy to me, Leviticus chapter 20. For I, the Lord, am holy and have separated you. I've separated you from the peoples around you, that you should be mine. Do you get this? God, back in Leviticus, he's talking to his people. He's talking to the people that he's called out of Egypt. He's talking to his children, and he's saying, I'm doing something different in you. Something different from all the peoples around you. They're going to look at you, and they're going to see something different. They're going to see something noticeable. They're going to see something shocking, sometimes even offensive, but they're going to see something different. And it builds on this principle that we saw a couple weeks ago as we were looking at anger, and we were looking at murder, and we were looking at hate, and we saw that it went way deeper than just simply one person ends another person's life, that this is a heart thing. And it goes way down deep, and we saw that our relationship with others directly impacts our relationship with God. That the way that we talk about each other, the way that we feel about each other, the actions that we have towards each other actually impacts our spirituality, and it impacts our relationship with God. And I would even say, and I think that this is right in here, and one of the primary reasons why Jesus preaches this to his followers is because it also impacts others' relationship with God too. That is a crazy amount and a dangerous amount of power that you have, Christ follower. You have the power to impact another person's relationship with God. do you recoil a bit at that? Because I do, man. When I think about that, when I think about if that's true, man, the way that I'm living, the things that I'm saying, the things that I'm doing, every little bit of it, I feel like I immediately need to survey and look at and think about, because if I'm impacting other people's relationship with God, right? The whole reason we stood up and we greeted each other and we connected with each other, and hopefully we went past the weather, and hopefully we went past what did you do this weekend, is because you impact you, and you impact you. And we all impact each other's relationship with God. We have a say in that. Man, that's dangerous on the negative side. But man, there's potential and power there on the positive side. And that's why Jesus preaches this message. Because he wants his followers impacting others' relationship with God. He wants you impacting others' relationship with God. And it starts with this very text here, having to do with lust. And I love the authority of Jesus right here as he says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now, so many of these words we skip and we go straight to, it's not just the action, but it's the intent. But man, even before that, there are two phrases here that are so powerful. You have heard that it's said, but I say to you. You have heard that it's said, and then Jesus quotes the sixth commandment. He quotes, you shall not commit adultery. And then he says, but hey, I say to you. All right, you know that there's this commandment that God gave, but listen to me. Do you see the level that Jesus is putting himself on as he quotes this? This is why Jesus was so shocking to people. All right, it wasn't just the miracles. It wasn't just the actions. It wasn't even some of the shocking teachings that he had, but it was this type of speech. You've heard that it was said, but now I say. All right, Pharisees, rabbis, scribes, teachers back in this day, they never say that. They always quote someone. Well, Rabbi so-and-so said, who he learned from so-and-so, who he learned from so-and-so, who he got from this writing called the Mishnah, and that's how they would quote their rules. They would never, ever, ever say, I say to you. To say, I say to you, puts him on a pretty high pedestal, puts him on the God level here. And this is why he's so shocking to people. But I say to you, and do you realize that his I say to you is clarifying something? It's clarifying something big. You see, Jews back then, man, it wasn't just you shall not commit adultery. Because they always had to know, okay, well, and this is so true. I don't know, those of you who have ever worked with kids, who have ever worked with youth, or who have had teenagers, when you come to the conversation of the sex talk, or crossing lines, or crossing boundaries, the question is always, well, how far is too far? What can I do before it's not okay anymore? So is it kissing? Is it touching? And we won't go through all this because I've got my kids here and I don't want them to ask me questions later. But they get there. They get to this point. They want to know, where's that line? Because I want to get as close as I possibly can to it, maybe even dangle 1 foot over before I sin. That's what they're interested in. And that was the Jewish mindset and the Jewish attitude too. So I quoted this book, the Mishnah. This is 613 rules and laws and commandments based on the 10 Commandments. All right? So when they asked, well, hey, what does it mean, don't commit adultery? Well, actually, it means this, and this. And they went on and on and on, and each new situation created a new need for a new law because we needed these boundaries. And so Jesus is saying, you've heard it said, don't commit adultery and everything that goes around with that, but listen to me. Here's what I say to you. And this is what he says. He says that everyone who looks at a woman, and man, in this day and age, it's not just men who have this problem, we realize. We can easily say anyone who looks at a woman or a man, anyone who looks at someone else, Any man who looks at a man, any man who looks at a woman, any man who's a woman who looks at a woman who's a man. Like, we can go on and on in this day, in this age, in this culture to cover every possible scenario. And what is true here is what he says. With lustful intent has already committed adultery with her or him or it or she or he or whatever in his heart. And that's what he's getting at. Long before the action happens, long before we've crossed that line, sin has happened. And so if you really want to break some bad news to your teenager or to your kid or your preteen or whoever, or maybe even to yourself, when you ask that question, where's the line? It's a lot further back than you thought. It's a lot further back than action. It actually goes into your heart. It goes into your mind. It goes into the muscles in your neck and where they're looking and how long they're looking for. Jesus makes this rule, this law, super strict, super stringent, and he does it for a reason. Anyone who looks at another with lustful intent has already committed adultery in their heart. And here's the part that really is shocking. And I remember reading this as a kid and being pretty scared about what I read. If your right eye causes you to sin, Jesus says, tear it out and throw it away, for it is better for you to lose one of your members than your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away, for it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. And there's no symbolism here. There's no imagery here. He's just being literal. As you read this throughout time, people try to figure out, okay, well, what does he mean by hand? What does he mean by eye? What is he talking about when he says hell? What is he really talking about when he says cut it off? And how can we kind of understand this to not make it sound so harsh or so strict? And man, he's just literal about it. And what I thought was so fascinating and interesting is this phrase here, causes you to sin. That those 4 words are the translation of one Greek word, and I thought that this word was so fascinating. It's called scandalize. Huh. Sound like a word that you know? If your eye causes scandal, if your body, if your actions causes scandal, and the definition is just cause you to stumble, cause you to go from the right path to fall off of it and go on to another path. This past summer, we were doing this series on Proverbs, and it was amazing how this imagery was that every single one of us are walking a path. And this path either leads to wisdom, to God, to what is good and to what is right, or it leads to foolishness. To sin, to what is evil. And there are 2 ways to walk on this path, either towards wisdom or away from it towards foolishness. Scandalize seems to mean you were walking once towards wisdom and you have stumbled and you have turned around and you have caused yourself to sin. And it's not just a personal thing. Because scandalize in some of its other meanings, it says cause to shock or offend others as they see you and they are shocked and offended at what you've done. Have you ever had a hero who has fallen and become really bummed out about that? That happened to me. I used to have, in my bedroom downstairs where I lived, I had this giant poster of Tiger Woods. I thought he was amazing. I thought he was awesome. I thought it was so cool that this talented golfer just like came in, and who cares about golf as an elementary schooler? But all of a sudden I did. I thought he was awesome. I had a poster of him on my wall, and I thought he was so great. And then years later, he falls into all of these scandals. Scandals with money, scandals with adultery, scandals with his wife. And man, if I wasn't ashamed to have that poster on my wall when I found out about that. In fact, I had already moved out and gone to college at this point. I think we had preserved my room to that point, and I remember going home and taking that poster off my wall and putting it under my bed. That scandal shocked me, and it offended me, And I never looked at him the same way. The same thing has happened with pastor heroes of mine. There's this pastor who I used to read all of his books. And every time he came out with a new book, I was the first one to buy it because the way that he talked about grace, the way that he talked about love, the way that he clarified law and rules. And then, you know what? There goes the announcement. I've been in an inappropriate relationship and I have to leave my post. And it's like, And the books are still good, but they're definitely not prominent on my shelf anymore. They're not the first book I recommend to someone because I don't want them to look up the author and see the first things that come out are the news stories. Do you see how our actions, and this is straight from Jesus, have the power to scandalize not just ourselves, but others? And that our actions and our faults and our sins mess with the relationship others have with God. And man, what would it take? And is it even possible to live a life that does not do this? You see, here's the problem. There's this guy. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. His name's Billy Graham. And he lived this incredible life. And he just recently died a couple weeks ago. He's one of 3 people whose body was displayed at the Capitol Rotunda, and he's just being shipped all over because there are literally millions of people who want to pay honor and respect to him. His evangelism efforts throughout America had literally changed the scope of American Christianity. He was just this amazing man, and one of the things that made him so amazing was he never showed up in the newspapers with that word, scandal. He never showed up in the newspapers with this inappropriate conduct. He never showed up in the newspapers having to step down. And how was it possible for a guy like him, so prominent, to go so long when so many others had failed? I went to this conference just this past week. I was in Orlando. That was the reason I went down there, was to go to this church planting conference. And I went to this session that I thought was about something completely different. It was called Healthy Church Planters or something like that. And so I'm sitting down and I'm listening to this guy, and he's kind of building up into this story. And then he talks about his affair. And I was like, whoa, why am I listening to you? That was my first thought. But then I listened and I heard his story and I heard the things about him. And he talked about how he was on Outreach Magazine's top 100 up and coming pastors, and his church there in the Florida area had exploded. And he talked about the pride, how proud he was about it. And he talked about how many people were coming to him and how amazing he felt about this. And I was just listening to his story and seeing this big name pastor who had to leave his post. And he is definitely not the only one. There's a countless list of these guys. And it's not just pastors, right? Like, we know people in our own relationships, in our own families. We know people in our own friendship circles who've had to deal with this issue. Who it changes the way that we have to interact with them and their family because we're not sure what subject might lead around to that, and we don't even want to get close to that. And so, man, I'd rather keep the conversation to weather and what did you do this weekend, because I don't even want to get close to that. But I'm amazed at this Billy Graham guy, because one of the reasons that for 75 years of his ministry he was able to remain above reproach, he was able to remain without shocking or offending with scandalize, was this Modesto Manifesto. He got together with people from his organization in Modesto, California, and they were shocked and offended at the scandals that were going on in other preachers at the time. And they got together and they said, we don't want this to happen to us. Which that is the first step in the attitude that you need to have. Long before you do behavior modification, long before you say, hey, don't look at the computer screen, long before you say, hey, don't go near that other woman or man or whoever it is, long before that, it starts in our hearts, and that's what Jesus is saying. And they got this. And it's not this attitude of, this will never happen to me. Because truth here, everybody who it happens to says, I never thought this would happen to me. Everybody who this happens to, we see this and we're like, I never would have expected this to happen to them. The right attitude says, this could happen to me, and I really don't want it to. This could happen to me. There's a chance I could fall into an affair. There's a chance that I could fall into lust. There's a chance that I could cause someone else to stumble. Lord, I really don't want this to happen. Do you see the difference in those two attitudes? Do you see how it even starts right there with pride? This will never happen to me. I'm going to not let this happen to me. Or, this could happen. I'm scared of it happening. I know myself, and I don't want this to happen. Billy Graham and some other pastor, preachers, leaders in his organization got into a room scared of the scandals in the newspapers, and they said, we don't want this to happen to us. What can we do? And they came up with this Modesto Manifesto, and they realized that long before, and this is long before computer screens, but long before you looked at the image, long before you had the affair, there were some things that happened in your heart that needed to be controlled. And the first thing was this: honesty. And the manifesto says this: it was resolved that all communications to media and to the church would not be inflated or exaggerated. The size of crowds and the numbers of inquirers would not be embellished for the sake of making Billy Graham Evangelical Association look better. That doesn't even have anything to do with lust. Yes, it does. We are not going to be prideful. We are not going to puff ourselves up like this pastor that I sat and listened to. We are not going to think that the product of our work defines who we are. We're not going to become proud based on our achievements, based on our actions, based on anything about us. We're going to be honest about everything. And it's going to start, even with the numbers of the people who come, it's going to start with what we do. Honesty is going to define us. The second one was integrity. It was resolved that financial matters would be of directors for review and facilitation of expenditures. Every local crusade would maintain a policy of open books and publish a record of where and how monies were spent. He went all around the country preaching and evangelizing to millions of people. The way that he got funding for that was by taking a love offering right then and there. What does this have to do with lust? They saw fit that to be people of integrity, they would say, this is the money that came in during this time. This is how we spent it, and anyone can see. We're going to submit this to a board, and if Joe somebody wants to know, sitting here at this revival, where his $2 are going that he puts in this plate, he can know. He can know. We are going to be people of integrity. And we see people, if you had chosen to stay home this morning, you could have turned on your TV and you could see people wearing real fancy suits, who fly in real fancy private jets, who live in real fancy mansions, all funded by their real fancy evangelical organization. And if you want to know where the money goes, you can't know, because their board is made up of their family and their friends. And I'm not saying this to be mean or harsh. I'm saying it because it's the truth. And these guys got together and they realized that to protect themselves and to protect others, they needed to be people of integrity. And it meant being honest and open about what they do and when they do it. Number 3 was this: purity. Well, now it makes sense. Now we're talking about what we're supposed to be talking about. It was resolved that the members of the team would pay close attention to avoiding temptation. Never being alone with another woman. This was later changed to a member of the opposite sex. You got to remember, this was like the 1940s, okay? Things have changed here. But remaining accountable to one another. A practice of keeping wives informed of their activities on the road and helping them feel a part of any and all crusades they undertook would be encouraged. All right, so these men at this time, as they're out traveling and they're away, They're letting their wives know, here's what I'm doing, here's when I'm doing it, here's what's going on. They have people who they're accountable to while they're out of their actions, when they're going, where they're going, how they're doing it. They wanted to avoid temptation by never being alone with another woman. They didn't take these private counseling moments behind closed doors. They didn't share these intimate hugs or friendship moments. The former pastor that I sat and listened to, the way that his affair started was after church, shaking hands, a woman came up to him and said, man, I really wish we could be better friends. And he said, well, what are you talking about? We're friends, that's fine. And he brushed it off. He went and talked to his wife about it. And then 3 months later, it happened again. She came up and she's like, man, I'd really like to be better friends with you. And he said, this time I didn't tell my wife. This time I was like, I got this, I can handle this. And you can see how this progressed based on that. These guys got together and they said no. Starting with honesty, starting with integrity, starting with the very basic actions. And this is where people look at us and think we're crazy. This is where people like Mike Pence, the vice president, people look at him and think he's crazy. They think he's mean. They think he's a jerk because he follows this. He doesn't take private meetings with women. He doesn't take them out to dinner. He doesn't go out with his interns and give them special attention, and people feel like he's holding them back because of it. But he is being pure, and he's making sure that from the very basic actions that he's above reproach. And this doesn't just go for pastors. This doesn't just go for presidents and vice presidents. This goes for all of us. This goes for all of us. Do our spouses, do the people who are close to us, do we have friends or people who can be accountability partners who know what we do, when we do it, and how we're doing it? And do we live in such a way that's so crazy that people would look at us and say, why do you do that? But from these very basic things, we're not allowing even a tiny little foothold, even a tiny little step that could lead to another step, that could lead to scandalize, that could lead to us turning around and walking down the path of foolishness. And the final one was this: humility. It was resolved that members of the team were never to speak badly of another Christian minister and later another Christian, regardless of his or her denominational affiliation or differing theological views and practices. The mission of evangelism includes strengthening the body of Christ as well as building it. Pride not in building your own kingdom. Pride not in building your own church. Pride not in building your own name, your own reputation. But if we boast, it's in the work of Jesus, wherever he's doing it, however he's doing it, through whoever he's doing it through. And that humility would keep us from puffing up, keep us from thinking we've got this, keep us from thinking we can do this on our own, keep us with other people in the loop. This is crazy, man. As I was studying this, as I was studying lust and thinking through, man, what's different about this? And really digging down to the heart of what Jesus is talking about and realizing, man, we don't have to talk about sex at all, almost. Because Jesus is saying long before any of that stuff, there's some matters of the heart that I want to get down to. I want to get to your honesty. I want to get to your integrity. I want to get to your purity. I want to get to your humility. Because I know that if I have these things within you in check, you'll never get to that point. You'll never get to that point. We can never control our lust by regulating others. That was the thing that really stuck out to me as I was reading through this manifesto. It doesn't talk about creating laws to enforce sexuality. It doesn't talk about enforcing modesty on women or other people. It doesn't talk about, hey, how can I force this woman to dress so that I don't stumble? It doesn't talk about any of that stuff. It talks about looking at me, myself, who I am, in the very deep core of me, guarding and protecting our own hearts. And in doing that, we will show others a better way. We won't enforce upon others what we think is best. We will invite them, just as Jesus has invited us, into something we know is better. And I want to end it with this quote because I think it's so important. This is Joshua Harris. He's a popular author who speaks on sexuality and related things. He says, "The world takes us to a silver screen on which flickering images of passion and romance play. And as we watch, the world says, this is love. But God takes us to the foot of a tree on which a naked and bloodied man hangs and says, no, this is love. It's not meeting eyes across a field of flowers and running and meeting in the middle. It's not kissing in the rain. It's Jesus on the cross taking that sin, taking that shame, taking everything that we just said that we know is way too high of a standard and saying, I've got this, but come and follow me in it. That is love. And that's where it begins. And that's where it begins for all of us. If we want a better way, if we want a truer way, if we want a more humble way, if we want a way of more integrity, if we want a way that's purer, if we want a way that's better, then we start at the cross and we follow him there. And then we will show this world a better way, not just with lust, but with everything. Amen? Amen. Let's pray. Lord, you've shown us a better way at the cross. But you didn't just stop there, God. You preached this message. You preached this, come follow me. You preached this higher standard and you invited us into it. And God, I believe that you want us to live in it. I believe, Lord, that you could change this world if we really, truly would show them a better way. Help us, Lord, with wisdom to walk this path. Help us, Lord, with wisdom to show others a better way and not enforce upon them what we think is best. Help us, Lord, to live our lives in such a way that others can't help but see it and think, man, maybe there's something to that. Help us, Lord, in our lives not to become proud, not to become arrogant, not to think this could never happen to me, but to be real and honest with ourselves, knowing our brokenness and fleeing to you at all times so that when other people look at us, we are so close to you that they can't help but see you. Pray this in your strong name, Jesus. Amen.